Hi, I'm Nate Seberg, and this is One Day Ahead. Welcome to One Day Ahead, Great Gatsby Chapter 1. This is a web series for those teachers and students just trying to stay a day ahead of the class. So this could be the first time you've reached for that green light or like the 50th time you've run over Myrtle. Either way, I offer my thoughts on this American classic and my approach for teaching it. So each video's got 3 segments: a chapter summary, a look at the motivations of a character, advice specifically for teachers. If you're one of those educators, I got a whole unit for you. It's got lots of stuff: lit circle rules, activities, tools, chapter quizzes, a culminating project, and it's synced up with everything I will be talking about here over the next 9 weeks. It's worth every penny. The link's right down there in the thing. Go check it out. If you're here just for a refresher or for new ideas, that's cool too. If you like what I'm doing, support this channel by subscribing to it. All right, let's go to the summary. So 30-year-old Nick Carraway opens the book by saying that whenever he encounters behavior others might criticize, his daddy taught him to consider the advantages you've had. He goes on saying, in consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. As a narrative device, this is a good move because over the next 198 pages, our boy Nick here is going to be hanging out with some really terrible people, or at least people making terrible choices, Gatsby the Great included. If Fitzgerald didn't have us looking through the empathetic, non-judgy eyes of Nick here, I think I would legit hate every last person in this book. Nick helps soften him up. So what might not be clear here is that Nick is writing at the end of a timeline that we're about to cover. All the stuff that happens later in the text, this Nick has already lived through. And whatever he lived through, it has him pretty shaken up. It's like his whole life is spinning. He says that now he just wants the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. So whatever it was bad. The only thing he seems sure of is a man named Gatsby, a guy who he says had an extraordinary gift for hope. He continues, no, Gatsby turned out all right in the end, which if you've read this book before and you think about it for like even a second, he does not. But Nick continues, it's what preyed on Gatsby. What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interests in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. With that beautiful and slightly ominous line as our backdrop, Nick jumps back to the beginning of his narrative, and now we're off and running. So it seems Nick originally came to New York to sell bonds. He's new to this, but it's the 1920s, so why not? Over the next few pages, we learn about East and West Egg, 2 neighborhoods about 20 miles outside of New York. East Egg is old money. It's snooty, stuck-up, decadent, and lame, while West Egg is new rich. It's also decadent, but way more awesome. They face each other across a bay, and this will come up later. Things really get going when my boy Nick here heads to the mansion of Tom and Daisy Buchanan on East Egg. Daisy is Nick's cousin. She's flirty, coy, fun, and engaging, while Tom, by all accounts, is a world-class dumpster fire. This guy sucks. Nick describes him as a man who reached such an acute, limited excellence at 21 that everything after savored of anticlimax. Listen, if your life has peaked at 21, you need to get yourself some new goals. On page 10, Nick describes Tom as a powerful former football player. He talks about his glistening boots, his great pack of muscles, the effeminate swank of his riding clothes, and his cruel, cruel body. If you find this description to be vaguely sexual, so do I. The only other character is Daisy's friend, the androgynously named Jordan Baker, a famous golfer. When Jordan learns that Nick here just moved to New Money West Egg, she asks if he knows Gatsby. Daisy perks up at the name, but before Nick could reply that Gatsby's his neighbor, dinner is announced. Rich people apparently announce their dinner, I assume with a gong. So the dinner sucks. As servants wait on them, Tom sets off on this rant about how the Nordic race, them, created everything worth having and thus need to keep the inferior races down. All the while, no one at this dinner has ever actually made anything, and I regret not putting air quotes around inferior races. Right when most readers are starting to think, hey, this book is not very good, something interesting happens. The phone rings. Students are always surprised to learn they had telephones in the 1920s, but yeah, it turns out they did. They were big, clunky, and metal, but they did have them. Siri too. Tom ducks out to take the call. Daisy follows him outside, and after a moment, Nick and Jordan can hear the couple having a muffled shouting match on the other side of the door. So what's going on? Okay, keep up. Jordan informs Nick that Tom, the dumpster fire, has a lady friend in New York. This is not a friend who happens to be a lady. This is a lady friend. What's worse, Daisy knows about it. Yikes. Tom and Daisy come back into the room and it's super awkward, but Daisy keeps smiling and laughing like there's nothing wrong. And she keeps this act up as the phone rings again and again. I couldn't guess what Tom and Daisy were thinking, but I doubt even Miss Baker was able to put this fifth guest's shrill metallic urgency out of mind. I'll say it again. Yikes. After dinner, Nick and Daisy go off together, and she tells the story about the birth of her daughter. She says she, her daughter, was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where, though, I think we can guess. After she finds out it's a girl and cries about that fact for a while, she says, all right, I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. So, feminism. The chapter closes with Nick getting home and sitting outside for a while. Suddenly, he sees his neighbor come out of his ridiculous mansion. After a moment, the neighbor, who Nick rightly assumes is Gatsby, reaches his hand out across the water, trembling slightly. Nick looks across the bay to see what he's trying to, use the force on, but he doesn't see anything except for a single green light at the end of a dock across the bay. And that's a summary. So each episode, we dive deeper into a major theme of the chapter by exploring the inner motivations of a character, or by yelling at them. But either way, it's fun, and this episode is no exception, which is why this week's person of interest is Daisy Buchanan, and the theme is the insulating effect of wealth. Daisy, what are you doing? Why are you still with this man? He's having an affair, and I get that that happens in a world, but he's doing it openly, unrepentantly, and somehow you're smiling through it all. Look, I get that he has money, determination, and the effeminate swank of those riding clothes. Woof. But how'd you get here, Daisy? I think it has something to do with that white girlhood in Louisville you mentioned. White girlhood meaning pure, unblemished? I bet you grew up in wealth, probably not like Tom wealth, but in high enough society to make you two a suitable match. So, wealthy girl, high society, Southern belle, I'm betting your father was like a judge or something. And I'll also bet that the pressure to uphold your and your family's reputation was enormous. Regardless of the truth, the face you put to the world was the paramount thing. You have been defending your reputation for so long that you have confused it with your life. What it looks like has supplanted what it is. And on paper, what it looks like, Tom was a great choice. He had it all, the absurd money, the standing, the sports fame. You probably thought he had it made. That first time that he cheated on you must have been terrible. But when he did, and when you found out, Daisy, you made your choice. You chose to care more about what your marriage looked like than what it was. I don't know if you rationalized your way through it or if you embraced the sweet nepenthe of denial. Google it, everybody. But Tom's money and your social status has insulated you both from the natural consequences that just seem to plague the rest of us. So here you are, smiling across the dinner table at a husband who's openly cheating on you. A cautionary tale for the other poor rich girls on East Egg. But maybe that's too harsh, because I don't know what other choice you really had. I mean, everything flows through Tom. If you, as Nick inwardly reflected, rushed out of the house, child in arms, what would you be rushing to? I mean, what real options do you have? This is 1920s America. A divorcee with a kid in high society is damaged goods. You might remarry, but you really might die a spinster. And either way, Tom is going to cheat on his new wife within a year. In conclusion, Daisy, I wish you were stronger. I want such better things for you. I wish you'd leave him, but I kind of understand why you don't. With love, Nate. So this book is complex. It's a thin little volume, but there is so much packed into so little that for a teacher, it can be hard to know what to aim at. That's why I'm here. Teachers, let me give you my take. So this book is set up perfectly for a rich study of character. It's really a masterclass on how nuanced characters can be subtly revealed over time. For that reason, after the Did You Read quiz in the Lit Circles, which we do nearly every day, I have students dive into a character each chapter using what I've rather weakly named the Character Illumination Chart. Again, it's all in the link thing. So I used to start with Nick because he's the narrator, but it's actually Daisy you want to focus on. She won't be back again really until chapter 5, and Nick is actually way more interesting in chapter 2, so we'll hit him next week. Since Daisy's our focus, I start the lesson with really a pretty serious question. Why do people stay in abusive relationships? This is interesting and sets a good tone for the chapter. Now, let's talk potential directions you could go with this chapter. First, money. If you want to take the financial historical approach, you can take Nick's narration about borrowing money to become a bond man to point students to the boom of the 1920s and obviously the crash in 29. There is a whole world there. Second, language of motion. There's some really interesting stuff about how Fitz used language to capture the rushing, manic nature of the era. For instance, just listen to his description of Tom's house. The lawn started at the beach and ran towards the front door for a quarter of a mile mile, jumping over sundials and brick walls and burning gardens. Finally, when it reached the house, drifting up the side in bright vines, as though from the momentum of its run. Third, what it means to flirt. Consider clarifying for students that Daisy is a flirt, but not in the I want to get with my cousin sort of way. This is going to come up a bunch and students can get super fixated on it, so you might want to address it at the start. Fourth, the kid. Did you notice how the child is absolutely nowhere to be seen? The kid doesn't even have a name. Nick says, I suppose she talks and eats and everything? My read on this, aside from my assumption that Nick has never babysat, is that Fitzgerald is showing us the way money has so isolated Tom and Daisy from the consequences of normal life. Parenting? Yeah, we pay someone for that. This conversation early on will give context to how Tom and Daisy can just throw down a bunch of money and walk away from the mess at the end of this book. Consequences are for poor people. Finally, the phone call. That's this week's If You Only Hit One Thing. So this might be surprising, but in my experience, the kids largely do not follow what happens in this scene. They get that Tom was cheating generally, but they miss what happened that let everybody know about it. I always made sure to blow that moment up for them so that they can feel the tension as the phone just keeps ringing. Helping them see how foundationally broken this marriage is lends insight into so much that will follow. The green light we mentioned, to be sure, but don't dwell on it. They just don't have enough context to understand this moment yet. And that's chapter 1. Don't forget to subscribe and to check out my unit by following the link below. Next time, we head to chapter 2, where Nick gets drunk, Myrtle buys a dog, and Tom demonstrates the superiority of the Nordic race by beating up a woman. All that and more next time on One Day Ahead.